Greetings, tonight's topic is the fascinating survival strategies of medieval peasants during their coldest nights. Without further ado, let us commence the narrative. In the depths of medieval winter, when frost painted intricate patterns across wooden shutters, and the breath of every living creature became visible clouds in the bitter air, peasants faced their greatest challenge of survival. The long nights stretched endlessly before them, darkness falling early in the afternoon and lingering well past dawn, bringing with it a cold so penetrating it seemed to seep into their very bones. These were not the pampered nobles in their stone castles with grand fireplaces and thick tapestries, but common folk whose entire existence depended on their ingenuity, resilience, and the hard-earned wisdom passed down through countless generations of ancestors who had weathered similar trials. The typical peasant dwelling was a humble structure, often little more than a single room shared by an entire family, sometimes including their most precious livestock. These homes were built with whatever materials the land provided and their meager resources could afford. Peasants would spend considerable time during autumn months gathering and preparing roofing materials, knowing that their survival through the winter months might depend on the quality of their thatching work. They would layer the materials carefully, ensuring that water would run off efficiently while maintaining the insulating properties that would prove so crucial during the coldest nights. Windows, if they existed at all in peasant homes, were small openings that could be covered with wooden shutters, oiled cloth, or thin sheets of scraped animal hide that allowed some light to filter through while blocking the worst of the wind and cold. Glass was a luxury far beyond the reach of common folk, existing primarily in churches and the homes of the wealthy. Instead, peasants relied on these makeshift coverings, often stuffing additional rags or straw around the edges during particularly harsh weather, to eliminate drafts that could sap precious warmth from their living space. The central feature of any peasant home during winter was the hearth, though this was often a far cry from the grand fireplaces found in noble residences. Many peasant hearths were simple fire pits dug into the earthen floor, surrounded by stones to contain the flames and provide a cooking surface. The smoke would rise and eventually find its way out through a hole in the roof or through gaps in the thatch, though this meant that the interior of the home was often filled with a haze of smoke that, while irritating to eyes and lungs, also provided additional warmth as it circulated throughout the space before escaping. Fuel for these fires was a constant concern and required careful planning and conservation throughout the colder months. Wood was the preferred fuel when available, but peasants could not simply venture into the forest and cut down trees at will. When wood was scarce, peasants became remarkably resourceful in finding alternative fuels. Dried animal dung, particularly from cattle and horses, burned surprisingly well once properly dried and could provide substantial heat. Peat, where available, was another valuable fuel source that burned slowly and produced good heat, though it required considerable effort to cut and dry during warmer months. Even agricultural waste products like straw, dried corn cobs, and the stubble from harvested fields could be utilized as fuel, though these burned quickly and required constant attention to maintain a fire. The management of fire during the coldest nights was both an art and a science that peasants mastered through necessity. They learned to bank their fires carefully before sleep, covering the coals with ash to slow the burning process and preserve fuel while maintaining enough heat to last through the night. This technique, known as banking or raking the fire, could keep coals alive for many hours, allowing the fire to be easily rekindled in the morning without the need to start completely fresh, which could be challenging in the depths of winter when everything was cold and damp. Clothing and bedding were perhaps even more critical than shelter in surviving the coldest nights. Peasants typically owned very few garments, and these had to serve multiple purposes throughout the changing seasons. Wool was the most common material for winter clothing, as sheep were relatively common in most medieval regions, and wool possessed excellent insulating properties even when wet. However, the wool available to peasants was often of coarse quality, roughly spun and woven into thick, scratchy fabrics that were more functional than comfortable. Layering was the key strategy for staying warm, with peasants wearing multiple garments to trap air between the layers. A typical winter outfit might include a linen undergarment next to the skin, followed by a woolen tunic and topped with an outer garment such as a cloak or heavy coat. The outermost layer was particularly important, often made from the thickest wool available, or sometimes from leather that had been treated to repel water and wind. These outer garments were precious possessions, carefully maintained and repaired repeatedly throughout their useful life, often being passed down from parents to children as valuable inheritance. Footwear presented particular challenges during winter months. Many peasants went barefoot or wore simple sandals during warmer weather, but winter demanded more substantial protection. Leather boots, when available, were often crude affairs made from whatever hide could be obtained, typically from animals that had died naturally or been slaughtered for food. These boots were frequently little more than pieces of leather wrapped around the feet and tied in place, offering protection from snow and ice but providing limited insulation. Some peasants stuffed their boots with straw, dried grass, or rags to improve warmth, though this made walking more difficult and the materials would become matted and less effective over time. Sleeping arrangements during the coldest nights required careful consideration and often involved the entire family working together to maximize warmth and survival. Beds, as we understand them today, were luxury items far beyond the reach of most peasants. Instead, sleeping areas typically consisted of straw-filled sacks or simple piles of straw covered with whatever blankets, furs, or additional clothing the family possessed. These sleeping areas were usually positioned as close to the hearth as safely possible, taking advantage of radiant heat from the fire throughout the night. Family members would often sleep together, not merely for emotional comfort, but as a practical survival strategy. Body heat shared among multiple people under the same coverings could mean the difference between surviving a particularly brutal night and succumbing to the cold. Parents would position young children between themselves and other family members, ensuring that the most vulnerable individuals benefited from the warmth generated by larger bodies. This practice, while born of necessity, also strengthened family bonds and provided psychological comfort during the darkest and most challenging times of the year. The blankets and coverings used by peasant families were typically made from whatever materials they could produce or obtain. Wool blankets were ideal but expensive, so many families made do with coverings sewn from scraps of fabric, old clothing, or even stuffed with straw, feathers, or down if they were fortunate enough to have access to such materials. These coverings were precious family possessions, carefully maintained and passed down through generations, with repairs and patches being added as needed to extend their useful life. Animal furs, when available, provided excellent insulation and were highly prized by peasant families. However, obtaining furs required either successful hunting, which was often restricted by feudal laws, or trading relationships with those who had access to pelts. Rabbit, deer, sheep, and goat skins were most commonly available to peasants, though even these were valuable commodities that might need to be sold during times of extreme hardship to purchase food or other necessities. The sharing of sleeping spaces extended beyond human family members to include valuable livestock during the harshest weather. Cattle, pigs, goats, and chickens were often brought into the main living area during blizzards or extreme cold, serving the dual purpose of protecting these valuable animals from freezing while also contributing their body heat to warm the shared space. This practice, while perhaps unsanitary by modern standards, was a practical and effective survival strategy that could provide the additional warmth needed to survive particularly brutal nights. Food and nutrition played crucial roles in helping peasants survive cold nights, though winter was typically a time of scarcity rather than abundance. The human body requires additional calories during cold weather to maintain core temperature and basic bodily functions. But winter was precisely when food was most scarce for medieval peasants. The growing season had ended, fresh meat was difficult to obtain, and preserved foods had to be carefully rationed to last until spring brought new sources of sustenance. Preserved foods formed the backbone of winter nutrition for peasant families. During autumn harvest time, considerable effort went into preparing foods that could survive the winter months without spoiling. Grains were dried and stored in containers that protected them from moisture and pests, though even with careful storage, some loss to mold, insects, and rodents was inevitable. Root vegetables like turnips, carrots, and onions could be stored in root cellars or buried in straw-lined pits that protected them from freezing while keeping them fresh for extended periods. Salt, when available, was used to preserve meat and fish, though salt was an expensive commodity that many peasants could afford only in small quantities. More commonly, peasants relied on smoking and drying techniques to preserve meat, hanging strips of flesh near their fires to slowly dehydrate while absorbing flavors from the smoke. This process created foods that could last for months when properly prepared and stored, providing essential protein during the lean winter months. Warming foods and beverages were particularly important during the coldest nights. Hot porridge made from whatever grains were available provided both nutrition and internal warmth that helped maintain body temperature throughout long cold nights. These porridges were often thin affairs, stretched with water to make limited grain supplies last longer, but the hot liquid still provided comfort and energy when it was most needed. Herbal teas and warming drinks made from available plant materials offered additional comfort during cold nights. Peasants with access to herbs like ginger, cinnamon, or other warming spices might brew hot beverages that provided both liquid and therapeutic warming effects. More commonly, simple hot water infused with whatever edible plant materials were available could provide the psychological and physical comfort of a warm drink, even when nutritional value was limited. The communal aspects of food preparation and consumption became particularly important during winter months. Cooking over a single fire was more efficient than attempting to maintain multiple heat sources, and gathering around the hearth for meals provided opportunities for family members to share body heat while consuming warming foods. These mealtimes often became important social periods when family members could share news, tell stories, and provide mutual emotional support during the challenging winter months. Community cooperation and mutual aid were essential elements in peasant survival strategies during the coldest periods of winter. Individual families, no matter how resourceful and hardworking, sometimes found themselves overwhelmed by particularly severe weather or other challenges beyond their control. In such circumstances, the broader peasant community often rallied to provide assistance that could mean the difference between survival and catastrophe for struggling families. Neighbors might share fuel resources when one family's wood supply ran dangerously low, understanding that today's generosity might be repaid when their own circumstances became desperate. These informal support networks were based on the practical understanding that community survival depended on the survival of individual families, and that mutual aid during crisis periods strengthened the entire community's resilience against future challenges. Shared activities during winter months served both practical and social purposes that contributed to survival during the coldest nights. Group gatherings in homes with the largest hearths allowed multiple families to benefit from shared warmth while conserving individual fuel supplies. These gatherings might involve communal food preparation, crafting activities, storytelling, or simple companionship that helped maintain psychological health during the isolating winter months. The exchange of goods and services within peasant communities became particularly important during winter, when individual families' resources might prove insufficient. A family with excess grain might trade with neighbors who had surplus preserved meat, wool, or other needed materials. These exchanges were rarely formal commercial transactions, but rather informal arrangements based on trust, reciprocity, and mutual understanding of each family's needs and capabilities. Religious and spiritual practices provided additional comfort and psychological support during the most challenging winter nights. Medieval peasants were typically devoutly religious, finding in their faith both explanation for their hardships and hope for eventual relief. Prayer, both individual and communal, offered psychological comfort and a sense of connection to divine protection during times when human resources seemed inadequate to ensure survival. Religious festivals and observances during winter months provided important breaks from the grinding routine of survival activities. These celebrations, even when resources were limited, offered opportunities for communities to gather, share what food and warmth they could, and reinforce social bonds that were crucial for mutual support. The Christmas season, despite occurring during the depths of winter, brought hope, celebration, and community solidarity that helped peasants endure the darkest and coldest period of the year. The telling of stories, singing of songs, and sharing of traditional knowledge during long winter nights served multiple important functions beyond mere entertainment. These activities helped pass the interminable hours of darkness while preserving and transmitting crucial survival knowledge from older to younger generations. Stories often contained practical information about weather patterns, plant identification, animal behavior, and other knowledge that could prove essential for survival, embedded in memorable narrative forms that ensured accurate transmission across generations. Crafting and repair activities provided both practical benefits and psychological relief during winter months when outdoor agricultural work was impossible. Peasants would spend winter evenings repairing tools, mending clothing, weaving cloth, or creating household items that would be needed in the coming year. These activities could be performed near the fire, taking advantage of its warmth and light while accomplishing necessary tasks that contributed to the family's survival and well-being. The creation and maintenance of warm clothing was an ongoing winter activity that required considerable skill and attention. Spinning thread from raw wool or plant fibers was time-consuming work that could be performed during long winter evenings, producing the materials needed for weaving cloth or knitting garments. Peasant women typically possessed sophisticated knowledge of textile production, understanding how to process raw materials into finished products that provided optimal warmth and durability for their family's needs. Repair and maintenance of existing clothing and bedding was equally important, as replacing worn items was often impossible during winter months when materials and trading opportunities were limited. Careful patching, darning, and reinforcement could extend the useful life of critical items, ensuring that families maintained adequate protection against cold throughout the winter season. The psychological challenges of surviving the coldest nights were often as significant as the physical hardships peasants faced. The combination of cold, darkness, hunger, and isolation created conditions that could lead to despair, depression, and loss of will to continue struggling for survival. Peasant families developed various coping strategies to maintain mental health and morale during these challenging periods. Maintaining daily routines and purposeful activities helped provide structure and meaning during the seemingly endless winter nights. Even when options were limited, having specific tasks to accomplish, traditions to maintain, and responsibilities to fulfill gave peasants reasons to continue their survival efforts and maintain hope for better conditions in the future. The importance of maintaining connections with other community members cannot be overstated in understanding peasant survival strategies. Human beings are fundamentally social creatures, and isolation during winter months could prove psychologically devastating. Regular contact with neighbors, participation in community activities, and maintenance of social relationships provided crucial emotional support that helped individuals and families persevere through the darkest and coldest periods. Hope for the future was perhaps the most important psychological resource peasants possessed during winter months. The knowledge that winter would eventually end, that spring would return with its promise of warmth, light, and new growing seasons, provided the motivation needed to endure present hardships. This hope was reinforced by the cyclical nature of peasant life, with each winter serving as proof that survival was possible and that better times would eventually return. The gradual lengthening of days after the winter solstice provided tangible evidence that the worst of winter was passing, even when the coldest weather might still lie ahead. Peasants who survived to see these longer days knew that they had successfully navigated the most challenging period and could begin to anticipate the eventual return of spring with its opportunities for renewed food production and improved living conditions. Planning and preparation for future winters began almost as soon as each winter ended, with experienced peasants understanding that survival depended on year-round attention to winter preparedness. The lessons learned during each winter season informed preparations for subsequent years, with successful strategies being refined and unsuccessful approaches being abandoned in favor of more effective alternatives. The accumulation of winter survival knowledge across generations created sophisticated understanding of weather patterns, resource management, and survival techniques that were passed down through families and communities. This traditional knowledge represented the distilled wisdom of countless individuals who had faced similar challenges and developed effective responses, creating a cultural inheritance that was as valuable as any material possessions in ensuring survival during the coldest nights. Young people in peasant communities were carefully trained in winter survival techniques, understanding that their future survival depended on mastering these skills before they established households of their own. This education was typically informal but thorough, with children participating in winter survival activities from an early age and gradually assuming greater responsibilities as they demonstrated competence and maturity. The evaluation of winter survival strategies was an ongoing process that helped peasant communities continuously improve their effectiveness in dealing with cold weather challenges. Families and communities would assess what had worked well during each winter season, identifying successful innovations and abandoning techniques that had proven inadequate or inefficient. Weather prediction and planning based on natural signs helped peasants prepare for particularly severe cold periods before they arrived. Experienced individuals within communities often possess sophisticated knowledge of weather patterns, animal behavior, and natural phenomena that could indicate approaching severe weather, allowing communities to make additional preparations when especially harsh conditions were anticipated. The role of leadership within peasant communities became particularly important during severe winter weather, when coordinated responses might be necessary for community survival. Respected elders, skilled craftspeople, or individuals with particular expertise in winter survival often assumed informal leadership roles, helping coordinate community resources and responses to weather-related challenges. The adaptation of daily schedules and routines to winter conditions was another crucial element in peasant survival strategies. Understanding when to conserve energy, when to venture outside for necessary tasks, and how to minimize exposure to dangerous conditions while still accomplishing essential activities required careful planning and flexibility in responding to changing conditions. The maintenance of health and treatment of cold-related injuries were constant concerns during winter months when medical resources were extremely limited and professional medical care was typically unavailable to peasant families. Traditional knowledge of herbal remedies, warming techniques, and basic medical care was essential for dealing with frostbite, hypothermia, respiratory ailments, and other cold-related health problems. Preventive health measures were particularly important given the limited treatment options available. Peasants learned to recognize early signs of cold-related health problems and developed techniques for preventing minor issues from becoming serious threats to survival. This might include specific warming techniques, dietary adjustments, or activity modifications that helped maintain health during challenging winter conditions. The importance of maintaining physical fitness and strength throughout winter months was well understood by peasant communities. While food scarcity might limit nutritional support for physical condition, maintaining some level of activity and exercise helped preserve the physical capacity needed for essential survival tasks like gathering fuel, maintaining fires, and caring for livestock. Mental health and emotional well-being received attention through various traditional practices and Community support systems. The recognition that psychological health was closely connected to physical survival led to community practices designed to maintain morale, provide emotional support, and help individuals cope with the stress and challenges of winter survival. The integration of winter survival strategies with ongoing agricultural and economic activities ensured that survival efforts did not completely derail peasants' ability to prepare for future seasons and maintain their long-term economic viability. Balancing immediate survival needs with longer-term planning required sophisticated understanding of resource management and strategic thinking. The documentation and preservation of successful winter survival techniques through oral tradition, practical demonstration, and community memory ensured that valuable knowledge was not lost when experienced individuals died or moved away from the community. This cultural preservation of survival knowledge represented a form of insurance against future challenges and helped maintain community resilience across generations. The celebration of successful winter survival served important psychological and social functions within peasant communities. Recognizing and commemorating the achievement of surviving particularly harsh winters helped build community pride, reinforced successful strategies, and provided motivation for facing future challenges with confidence and determination. The economic implications of winter survival strategies extended far beyond the immediate survival period, influencing peasant families' economic prospects for years to come. Families that successfully survived winters with minimal loss of resources, health, or productive capacity were better positioned to take advantage of opportunities in subsequent seasons, while those who suffered significant losses during winter might require years to recover their economic stability. The investment in winter survival infrastructure and equipment represented significant economic decisions for peasant families with extremely limited resources. Choices about how to allocate scarce resources among competing survival needs required careful calculation and often involved difficult trade-offs between immediate comfort and long-term survival capacity. The development of specialized skills related to winter survival created opportunities for some peasants to provide valuable services to their communities, potentially improving their economic status and social position. Individuals who became particularly skilled at activities like fuel gathering, food preservation, or crafting winter clothing might find opportunities to trade their expertise for other needed resources or services. The maintenance and repair of winter survival equipment throughout the year represented ongoing economic considerations that influenced peasant families' resource allocation decisions. Understanding the true costs of winter survival required calculating not only immediate expenses, but also the ongoing maintenance and replacement costs associated with survival equipment and infrastructure. The relationship between winter survival success and overall quality of life was clearly understood by medieval peasants, who recognized that effective winter survival strategies were essential foundations for achieving any measure of prosperity or security in their harsh and challenging world. The knowledge of weather patterns and seasonal changes was perhaps one of the most sophisticated aspects of peasant winter survival, developed through generations of careful observation and hard-won experience. Peasants learned to read the subtle signs that nature provided, understanding that their survival often depended on accurately predicting when the harshest weather would arrive and how long it might last. They watched the behavior of wild animals, noting when squirrels began gathering nuts more frantically or when birds started their southern migrations earlier than usual, interpreting these signs as warnings of particularly severe winters ahead. The thickness of animal fur coats in autumn, the height at which hornets built their nests, and the abundance of berries on wild bushes all served as natural indicators that peasants learned to interpret with remarkable accuracy. These observations were shared within communities and passed down through families, creating a sophisticated system of weather prediction that often proved more reliable than the limited written records or formal weather knowledge available during the medieval period. Understanding wind patterns was crucial for peasant survival during winter months. Peasants learned to recognize the direction and intensity of winds that brought the coldest weather, positioning their homes and shelters to minimize exposure to these harsh conditions. They understood that certain wind directions might indicate approaching storms or temperature drops, allowing them to make additional preparations or take shelter before the worst conditions arrived. This knowledge helped them plan their daily activities, timing essential outdoor tasks for periods when weather conditions would be most favorable. The construction and maintenance of windbreaks around their homes and farms represented another crucial survival strategy. Peasants would plant hedges, build fences, or stack materials to create barriers that deflected the worst winds away from their living spaces. These windbreaks not only reduced the direct impact of cold winds, but also helped prevent snow from drifting against doors and windows, ensuring that peasants could exit their homes even after heavy snowfall and maintaining access to essential outdoor areas like fuel storage or livestock shelters. Snow and ice management required constant attention and considerable physical effort throughout the winter months. Peasants developed techniques for clearing pathways and maintaining access to essential areas while conserving their energy for other survival tasks. They learned to work with snow rather than simply fighting against it, sometimes using snow itself as insulation around the base of their homes, or as protective covering for stored materials that needed to be kept at consistent temperatures. The creation of emergency shelters and backup heating sources provided additional security against unexpected severe weather or equipment failures. Peasants understood that their primary heating system might fail at the worst possible moment, so they maintained alternative heat sources and emergency shelter options that could sustain them through brief periods when their main survival systems were compromised. These might include small backup fires in different locations, emergency stores of fuel kept separate from their main supplies, or predetermined plans for seeking shelter with neighbors if their own homes became uninhabitable. Water management during winter presented unique challenges that required both planning and daily attention. While peasants needed access to water for drinking, cooking, and basic hygiene, sources of liquid water often froze solid during the coldest periods, forcing them to develop alternative strategies for meeting their water needs. They learned to collect and store water during warmer periods, keeping it in locations where it was less likely to freeze completely, and developing techniques for melting ice and snow when liquid water was unavailable. The process of melting snow for water required understanding of efficient techniques that maximized water yield while minimizing fuel consumption. Peasants learned that fresh, clean snow provided more water per unit of fuel used for melting than older, packed snow or ice. They developed methods for collecting the cleanest snow available and melting it in ways that conserved precious fuel while providing adequate water for their families' needs. Maintaining access to water sources like wells or streams during freezing weather required ongoing effort and sometimes ingenious solutions. Peasants might cover wells with insulating materials to prevent complete freezing, or maintain small fires near water sources to keep them accessible. They understood the importance of preventing their primary water sources from becoming completely inaccessible, as finding alternative sources during winter storms could be extremely dangerous or impossible. The storage and rationing of water during winter months required careful planning and discipline. Water that had been collected and stored needed protection from freezing, which might involve keeping containers near heat sources or insulating them with available materials. Peasants learned to ration their water usage carefully, understanding that obtaining additional water during severe weather might be difficult or impossible, making conservation essential for survival. Personal hygiene during winter months presented significant challenges that peasants addressed through modified practices adapted to cold weather conditions. While maintaining cleanliness was important for health and social reasons, the combination of limited water, cold temperatures, and minimal privacy made regular bathing difficult or impossible. Peasants developed alternative hygiene practices that helped maintain basic cleanliness while acknowledging the practical limitations imposed by winter conditions. The use of snow for cleaning purposes provided one alternative when liquid water was unavailable. Clean snow could be used for washing hands, cleaning dishes, or other basic hygiene tasks, though peasants had to be careful to select only the cleanest snow and understand the limitations of snow-based cleaning methods. They learned techniques for using minimal amounts of heated water for essential cleaning tasks, maximizing the effectiveness of their limited water supplies. Clothing changes and laundering during winter required careful timing and planning. Peasants could not simply wash clothes whenever they became dirty, as wet clothing would freeze in cold conditions and might not dry properly without adequate heat sources. Instead, they developed schedules for clothing changes and laundering that took advantage of warmer periods or times when they could dedicate fuel to drying clothes near their fires. The maintenance of oral hygiene and basic grooming continued throughout winter months using available materials and adapted techniques. Peasants might use rough cloth or other materials to clean their teeth, or chew on certain plants that helped maintain oral health. They understood that maintaining basic hygiene was important for both physical health and social relationships within their communities, motivating them to find practical solutions despite difficult conditions. Food safety and storage during winter months required constant vigilance and sophisticated understanding of preservation techniques. The combination of limited food supplies and cold conditions created both opportunities and challenges for maintaining safe, nutritious food throughout the winter season. Peasants learned to recognize signs of spoilage even in cold conditions and developed techniques for maintaining food quality while making their limited supplies last as long as possible. The rotation and inspection of stored foods was an ongoing winter activity that helped prevent losses due to spoilage, pest infestation, or other problems. Peasants regularly checked their stored grains, vegetables, and preserved meats, moving items to prevent moisture accumulation and removing any materials that showed signs of spoilage before they could contaminate other supplies. This careful monitoring helped maximize the useful life of their stored foods and prevented catastrophic losses that could threaten survival. Understanding which foods were safe to eat after partial spoilage or freezing required sophisticated knowledge that peasants developed through experience and traditional teaching. They learned to identify which parts of partially spoiled foods might still be safe to consume and which foods were too dangerous to risk eating, even when alternative food sources were scarce. This knowledge helped them make difficult decisions about food safety while minimizing waste of precious food supplies. The preparation and cooking of partially preserved or marginal foods required special techniques that helped ensure safety while maximizing nutritional value. Peasants learned cooking methods that could make questionable foods safer to consume, such as extended boiling or specific combinations with other ingredients that helped neutralize potential problems. These techniques allowed them to extract maximum nutrition from their limited food supplies while maintaining reasonable safety standards. Pest control during winter months was essential for protecting stored food supplies from rats, mice, insects, and other creatures that might consume or contaminate precious food stores. Peasants developed various strategies for protecting their supplies, including physical barriers, traps, and storage techniques that minimized access by unwanted creatures. They understood that losing stored food to pests could be catastrophic during winter months when replacement was impossible. The construction of secure storage containers and areas required ongoing maintenance and improvement throughout winter months. Peasants constantly worked to improve their storage systems, sealing gaps that might allow pest access, reinforcing containers that showed signs of damage, and developing more effective protection methods based on their ongoing experiences with storage challenges. Maintaining livestock during the coldest nights was perhaps one of the most challenging aspects of peasant winter survival, as these animals represented crucial resources for food, materials, and economic security that could not be easily replaced if lost to winter conditions. The survival of livestock often determined whether peasant families would have adequate resources to survive not only the current winter, but also to rebuild their livelihoods in the coming growing season. Cattle, when peasants were fortunate enough to own them, required substantial shelter and care during winter months. These large animals needed protection from wind and precipitation while requiring adequate ventilation to prevent moisture buildup that could lead to respiratory problems or other health issues. Peasants constructed simple but effective shelters using available materials, often integrating livestock shelters with their own living spaces to share heat sources and make animal care more convenient during severe weather. The feeding of livestock during winter required careful planning and rationing of stored fodder that had been gathered during the growing season. Hay, straw, and other preserved plant materials had to be allocated carefully to ensure that animals received adequate nutrition while making supplies last throughout the entire winter period. Peasants learned to supplement stored fodder with other available materials, including tree bark, root vegetables, and any other edible materials they could provide to their animals. Pigs were particularly valuable livestock for peasant families because they could survive on a wider variety of foods than cattle and could be fed kitchen scraps, spoiled vegetables, and other materials that might otherwise go to waste. However, pigs still required shelter and care during the coldest weather, and peasants developed techniques for keeping these animals warm and healthy throughout winter months while maximizing their value as sources of meat and other materials. Chickens and other poultry presented unique challenges during winter months because these smaller animals were more vulnerable to cold temperatures while also being more difficult to keep warm efficiently. Peasants learned to construct appropriate shelters for poultry that provided protection while allowing adequate ventilation, and they developed feeding strategies that helped these animals maintain body heat while continuing to produce eggs when possible. The integration of livestock care with family survival strategies created synergies that benefited both humans and animals during the coldest periods. Animals provided body heat that helped warm living spaces, while humans provided protection and care that helped animals survive harsh conditions. This mutually beneficial relationship was carefully managed to maximize benefits for both parties, while minimizing resource consumption and labor requirements. Water provision for livestock during freezing weather required the same attention and techniques used for human water needs. But on a larger scale and with additional considerations for animal behavior and requirements. Peasants had to ensure that their animals had access to adequate liquid water while managing the additional fuel and labor costs associated with providing water to livestock during winter months. Milk production from cows and goats continued throughout winter months when these animals were properly cared for, providing peasant families with crucial nutrition during periods when other food sources were limited. However, maintaining milk production required adequate feeding, watering, and care of animals, representing a significant investment of resources and labor during winter months when both were in short supply. The processing and preservation of dairy products during winter months provided additional food sources while helping peasant families make the most of their livestock resources. Cheese making, butter production, and other dairy processing activities could be performed during winter months, creating foods that would keep well in cold conditions while providing valuable nutrition and variety in otherwise monotonous winter diets. Medical care for both humans and animals during winter months relied heavily on traditional knowledge and available plant materials, as professional veterinary or medical care was typically unavailable to peasant families. Understanding how to treat common cold-related ailments in both humans and animals was essential knowledge. That could mean the difference between minor problems and catastrophic losses during winter months. Herbal remedies and traditional treatments for cold-related illnesses were part of the essential knowledge that peasant families maintained and passed down through generations. They learned to identify and prepare plant materials that could help treat respiratory problems, digestive issues, skin conditions, and other health problems that commonly arose during cold weather. These treatments were not always effective by modern standards, but they represented the best medical care available to peasant families and sometimes provided significant relief for winter-related health problems. The prevention of illness and injury was often more important than treatment, given the limited therapeutic options available during medieval times. Peasants learned to recognize early signs of health problems and developed practices designed to prevent minor issues from becoming serious threats to survival. This preventive approach included dietary practices, activity modifications, and environmental changes that helped maintain health during challenging winter conditions. Childbirth during winter months presented particular challenges that required special preparation and community support. Women who were pregnant during winter needed additional nutrition, warmth, and care to ensure successful births and healthy babies. Communities often rallied to provide extra support for expectant mothers during winter months, understanding that successful reproduction was essential for community survival and continuity. Care of infants and young children during the coldest nights required special attention and techniques adapted to their unique vulnerabilities and needs. Young children were more susceptible to cold-related illnesses and injuries, requiring additional warmth, nutrition, and protection. Peasant families developed specific practices for keeping babies and young children warm and healthy during winter months, often involving shared sleeping arrangements, special clothing, and modified feeding practices. Elderly family members also required special consideration during winter months, as age-related frailties made them more vulnerable to cold-related health problems. Communities and families developed practices for providing additional care and support to elderly individuals during winter, understanding that their survival contributed to family and community stability, while their knowledge and experience were valuable resources for winter survival. The treatment of injuries during winter months was complicated by cold conditions that made wounds heal more slowly and increased the risk of infection. Peasants learned basic wound care techniques using available materials and developed understanding of how cold weather affected healing processes. They learned to protect injuries from cold exposure while maintaining cleanliness and promoting healing using traditional methods and available supplies. Psychological and emotional health received attention during winter months through various community practices and traditional approaches to mental wellness. The combination of cold, darkness, isolation, and scarcity created conditions that could lead to depression, anxiety, and other mental health problems that threatened both individual and community survival. Peasant communities developed various practices designed to maintain mental health and provide emotional support during the most challenging periods. Storytelling, music, and other cultural activities served important functions in maintaining psychological health during long winter nights. These activities provided entertainment and distraction from harsh conditions, while also serving educational and social functions that strengthened community bonds and preserved cultural knowledge. The sharing of stories, songs, and traditional knowledge helped pass time during long, dark evenings while maintaining connections between community members. Religious and spiritual practices provided comfort and meaning during difficult winter periods, helping peasants find purpose and hope despite harsh conditions. Prayer, religious observances, and spiritual reflection offered psychological resources that helped individuals and communities maintain the motivation and resilience needed to survive challenging winter conditions. Social gatherings and community activities, even when resources were limited, served important functions in maintaining mental health and community cohesion during winter months. These gatherings provided opportunities for social interaction, mutual support, and shared activities that helped combat the isolation and depression that could result from extended periods of harsh weather and limited mobility. The maintenance of daily routines and purposeful activities helped provide structure and meaning during winter months when normal agricultural and economic activities were suspended. Having specific tasks to accomplish, schedules to maintain, and responsibilities to fulfill gave peasants reasons to continue their survival efforts and helped maintain psychological stability during challenging periods. Hope and planning for the future were perhaps the most important psychological resources available to peasants during winter months. The knowledge that winter would eventually end and that spring would bring new opportunities for growth, prosperity, and improved conditions provided the motivation needed to endure present hardships and continue working toward survival and recovery. The celebration of festivals, holidays, and special occasions during winter months provided important breaks from the routine of survival activities while reinforcing community bonds and cultural traditions. These celebrations, even when resources were extremely limited, offered opportunities for joy, fellowship, and renewed hope that helped sustain peasant communities through the darkest and coldest periods of the year. Education and skill development continued during winter months when outdoor work was impossible, providing opportunities for young people to learn essential skills while giving adults purposeful activities that contributed to long-term family and community welfare. The transmission of knowledge, skills, and cultural traditions during winter months helped ensure that essential information was preserved and passed on to future generations. Craft production and artistic activities provided both practical benefits and psychological satisfaction during winter months. Creating useful items, decorative objects, or artistic works gave peasants productive activities that contributed to their material welfare while also providing creative outlets and sources of personal satisfaction during otherwise challenging periods. The planning and preparation for spring activities began during winter months, as peasants used the period of reduced outdoor activity to plan their coming year's agricultural activities, assess their resource needs, and prepare for the intensive work that would begin as soon as weather conditions permitted. This forward-looking planning helped maintain hope and purpose while ensuring that peasants would be ready to take maximum advantage of improved conditions when they arrived. The intricate relationship between peasant families and their local environment became most apparent during the harshest winter conditions, when survival depended entirely on understanding and working with the natural world around them. Every tree, stream, hill, and valley in their immediate vicinity held potential resources or provided crucial information about weather patterns, shelter opportunities, and survival possibilities that could mean the difference between life and death during the coldest nights. Trees provided far more than just fuel for peasant families during winter months. Different species offered various resources that experienced peasants learned to identify and utilize effectively. The inner bark of certain trees, particularly birch, pine, and willow, could be processed into emergency food sources when other supplies ran dangerously low. While tree bark was not particularly nutritious or palatable, it contained enough calories and nutrients to help sustain human life during periods of extreme scarcity, and peasants learned techniques for preparing bark that made it more digestible and somewhat more appealing. Pine needles could be brewed into a tea that provided essential vitamins, particularly vitamin C, helping prevent scurvy and other nutritional deficiencies that might develop during long winter months when fresh foods were unavailable. The resin from pine and other evergreen trees had medicinal properties that peasants utilized for treating wounds, respiratory ailments, and other health problems that commonly arose during winter. This natural pharmacy required extensive knowledge to use safely and effectively, but provided valuable medical resources when professional care was unavailable. The structure and growth patterns of trees provided information about local weather patterns and environmental conditions that helped peasants predict and prepare for severe weather. Trees that grew in sheltered locations might indicate areas where peasant families could build more effective windbreaks or locate emergency shelters. The direction of tree growth and the patterns of branch development revealed information about prevailing wind directions and weather patterns that informed peasant decisions about home placement and winter preparation strategies. Fallen logs and dead trees provided not only fuel but also materials for construction and tool making that were essential for winter survival. Peasants learned to identify which dead trees would provide the best burning wood, which fallen logs were suitable for construction materials, and how to process these resources efficiently while conserving their energy for other essential survival tasks. Natural shelters formed by rocks, caves, or dense tree growth provided emergency refuge opportunities that peasants identified and prepared during warmer months for potential use during winter emergencies. These natural shelters might serve as backup options if their primary homes became uninhabitable, or as temporary refuge during severe storms when traveling to their main shelter was impossible. Water sources in the local environment required careful management and protection during winter months to ensure continued access throughout the cold season. Peasants learned to identify which streams, springs, or other water sources were most likely to remain unfrozen during cold periods, and they developed techniques for protecting these sources from complete freezing through insulation, controlled heat application, or other methods. The landscape itself provided information about weather patterns and seasonal changes that helped peasants anticipate and prepare for the harshest conditions. Low-lying areas where cold air collected, exposed ridges where wind speeds were highest, and protected valleys where temperatures remained more moderate, all influenced peasant decisions about daily activities, travel routes, and emergency planning during winter months. Wild plant foods that remained available during winter months provided crucial supplementary nutrition that could help peasant families survive periods when their stored foods ran low. Rose hips, dried berries that clung to bush throughout winter, certain roots and tubers that could be dug from frozen ground, and other wild plant foods required extensive knowledge to identify, harvest, and prepare safely, but provided valuable nutrition and variety in otherwise limited winter diets. The behavior and presence of wild animals provided information about environmental conditions and also represented potential sources of food, fur, and other materials if peasants were skilled and fortunate enough to capture them. Understanding animal behavior patterns during winter helped peasants predict weather changes, locate water sources, and sometimes find opportunities for obtaining fresh meat during the lean winter months. Tracking and hunting during winter months required specialized skills and equipment that some peasants developed, though hunting was often restricted by feudal laws that reserved game animals for noble landowners. When hunting was permitted, or when desperate circumstances made the risk of punishment acceptable, peasants used their knowledge of animal behavior and winter survival strategies to locate and capture wild game that could provide life-saving nutrition and materials. Bird behavior provided particularly valuable information about approaching weather changes, as many species exhibited predictable behavioral patterns in response to changing atmospheric conditions. Peasants learned to interpret these natural weather forecasts, adjusting their activities and preparations based on the signals provided by local bird populations. Insect activity, while limited during winter months, still provided some information about environmental conditions and seasonal changes that experienced. Peasants learned to interpret the emergence of certain insects during brief warm periods, changes in insect behavior, or the discovery of insect larvae in protected locations, all provided information about local environmental conditions that informed peasant survival strategies. The preservation and utilization of natural materials gathered during autumn months required sophisticated understanding of how different materials behaved under winter conditions. Grasses, reeds, and other plant materials used for thatching, insulation, or craft purposes had to be properly dried, stored, and protected to maintain their usefulness throughout winter months. Peasants learned which materials were most durable, how to store them effectively, and how to process them for various uses during winter months. Stone and mineral resources in the local environment provided materials for construction, tool making, and heat storage that were essential for winter survival. Peasants learned to identify stones that held heat well for warming beds, rocks that could be shaped into useful tools, and mineral deposits that might provide materials for construction or craft activities during winter months. Clay and earth resources were utilized for construction, pottery making, and other purposes that contributed to winter survival capabilities. Understanding how different types of soil and clay behaved under freezing conditions helped peasants maintain their earthen construction and develop effective techniques for protecting their homes and storage facilities from frost damage. The seasonal changes in local water levels, soil conditions, and other environmental factors influenced peasant planning and preparation activities throughout the winter months. Understanding how their local environment changed during winter helped peasants anticipate problems, plan their activities, and make the most effective use of available resources during the challenging winter season. Microclimates within the local environment provided opportunities for peasants to take advantage of slightly warmer or more protected locations for specific activities or emergency shelter, a south-facing slope that received maximum sun exposure, a location protected from prevailing winds, or an area near a water source that provided slightly warmer conditions could be crucial. Resources during the most severe weather conditions. The interaction between peasant families and their local environment was not just about extracting resources but also about understanding and working with natural processes in ways that supported long-term survival and sustainability. Peasants learned to manage their use of local resources to ensure continued availability in future years, understanding that overexploitation could compromise their long-term survival prospects. Seasonal indicators provided by the local environment helped peasants time their activities and plan their resource use throughout winter months. The angle of sunlight, the length of days, the behavior of local plants and animals, and other natural indicators provided information about the progression of winter and the approach of spring that helped peasants make decisions about resource allocation and activity planning. The development of detailed local environmental knowledge required years of observation and experience that peasants accumulated throughout their lifetimes. This knowledge was shared within families and communities, creating a collective understanding of local conditions that represented one of the most valuable resources available for winter survival. Adaptation to local environmental conditions was an ongoing process that continued throughout each winter season as conditions changed and new challenges arose. Peasants constantly adjusted their strategies based on observed changes in weather patterns, resource availability, and other environmental factors that influenced their survival prospects. Traditional ecological knowledge passed down through generations provided the foundation for peasant understanding of their local environment, but this knowledge was continuously tested, refined, and updated based on ongoing experience and changing conditions. Each winter season provided new information that was incorporated into the collective knowledge base used for future survival planning. The integration of environmental knowledge with other survival strategies created comprehensive approaches to winter survival that addressed multiple aspects of the challenge simultaneously. Understanding how weather patterns affected food storage, how local resources could supplement stored supplies, and how environmental conditions influenced health and safety concerns helped peasants develop more effective overall survival strategies. Innovation and experimentation with environmental resources continued throughout winter months as peasants discovered new uses for familiar materials or developed improved techniques for utilizing available resources. These innovations were shared within communities and incorporated into traditional knowledge when they proved effective, contributing to the continuous improvement of winter survival capabilities. The spiritual and cultural significance of the local environment was often deeply intertwined with practical survival considerations, as peasants understood their relationship with the natural world in terms that encompassed both material and spiritual dimensions. This holistic understanding of their environment influenced their approaches to resource use, conservation, and environmental stewardship in ways that supported long-term survival and community stability. Environmental challenges during winter months tested peasant knowledge and adaptability, forcing them to develop creative solutions to unexpected problems or unusual conditions. These challenges often led to innovations and improvements in survival techniques that enhanced their ability to deal with future environmental difficulties. The teaching and transmission of environmental knowledge to younger generations was an essential aspect of community survival, ensuring that crucial information about local resources, weather patterns, and survival techniques would continue to be available for future winter survival efforts. This educational process continued throughout winter months as young people participated in survival activities and learned through direct experience and observation. Cooperative environmental management within peasant communities helped maximize the benefits available from local resources, while ensuring that these resources remained available for all community members. Sharing information about resource locations, coordinating resource gathering activities, and establishing informal agreements about resource use helped prevent overexploitation while ensuring that all families had access to essential environmental resources. The documentation and preservation of environmental knowledge through oral tradition, practical demonstration, and community memory ensured that valuable information about local environmental resources and survival techniques was maintained even when individual knowledge holders were lost to death, disease, or migration. This cultural preservation of environmental knowledge represented a crucial component of community resilience and survival capacity. Seasonal environmental management practices helped peasants prepare their local environment for winter survival, while also planning for resource needs in subsequent seasons. Activities like selective harvesting, habitat protection, and resource conservation during autumn months influenced the availability of environmental resources during winter and the recovery of these resources during the following growing season. The evaluation and assessment of environmental resources throughout winter months helped peasants understand how their local environment responded to different weather conditions and how various survival strategies affected the long-term availability of essential resources. This ongoing evaluation process informed future planning and resource management decisions that influenced long-term survival prospects. Climate variability and unusual weather patterns tested peasant environmental knowledge and forced adaptation of survival strategies to deal with conditions that might differ significantly from normal expectations. These challenging seasons often led to innovations and improvements in environmental resource use that enhanced overall survival capabilities and community resilience. The recognition of environmental limits and constraints helped peasants develop realistic expectations about what their local environment could provide and plan accordingly for situations when environmental resources might be insufficient to meet their survival needs. This realistic assessment of environmental capacity influenced decisions about resource storage, community cooperation, and emergency planning that were crucial for successful winter survival. Long-term environmental stewardship practices were integrated into winter survival strategies in ways that ensured continued availability of essential resources while meeting immediate survival needs. Peasants understood that short-term survival decisions could have long-term consequences for environmental resource availability, influencing their approaches to resource use and conservation during winter months. The integration of environmental knowledge with social and economic systems within peasant communities created comprehensive approaches to winter survival that addressed environmental, social, and economic challenges simultaneously. Understanding how environmental resources related to community social structures, economic relationships, and cultural practices helped peasants develop more effective and sustainable approaches to winter survival that supported both individual and community welfare. The delicate balance between immediate survival needs and long-term sustainability shaped every decision peasant families made during the harshest winter months, creating a complex web of considerations that extended far beyond simply staying warm and fed through the current crisis. Each piece of firewood burned, every scrap of food consumed, and every resource utilized had implications that would ripple forward into subsequent seasons and years, influencing the family's prospects for recovery and future survival. The mathematics of winter survival were brutally simple, yet infinitely complex. Peasant families had to calculate their resource consumption rates against their remaining supplies while accounting for the unpredictable duration and severity of winter conditions. A winter that lasted longer than expected or brought more severe cold than usual could exhaust carefully planned supplies, forcing families to make desperate choices between immediate survival and future welfare. These calculations required both practical arithmetic skills and intuitive understanding of probability and risk that peasants developed through hard experience. Energy conservation became an art form practiced with religious devotion during the coldest nights. Every movement, every task, every decision was evaluated in terms of energy expenditure versus essential necessity. Peasants learned to move slowly and deliberately to conserve body heat, to combine multiple tasks into single trips outside their warm shelters, and to position themselves and their activities to maximize the benefit gained from their limited heat sources. The choreography of daily life during severe winter weather reflected this careful attention to energy conservation. Families developed routines that minimize heat loss while maximizing productivity, timing their activities to take advantage of the warmest parts of the day while conserving energy during the coldest periods. These routines became almost ritualistic in their precision, with each family member understanding their role in maintaining the delicate balance between survival and resource conservation. Tool maintenance and repair during winter months required specialized knowledge and techniques adapted to cold weather conditions. Metal tools became brittle in extreme cold, wooden handles might crack or split, and normal repair materials might not work effectively in freezing conditions. Peasants learned to perform maintenance tasks near heat sources when possible, to use cold weather repair techniques, and to modify their tools for more effective use during winter conditions. The creation of specialized winter tools and equipment represented significant investments of time and materials that had to be planned and executed during warmer months. Ice choppers for breaking through frozen water surfaces, specialized snow removal tools, cold weather modifications to existing tools, and other winter-specific equipment required advanced planning and skilled craftsmanship to produce effective tools that could withstand harsh winter conditions. Clothing maintenance during winter months involved constant attention to keeping garments dry, warm, and in good repair under challenging conditions. Wet clothing could become deadly in cold conditions, so peasants developed techniques for keeping their limited clothing dry, while also cleaning and maintaining these essential items. This often required rotating garments carefully, using body heat to dry damp items, and performing repairs that could maintain clothing integrity even when working conditions were far from ideal. The layering systems that peasants developed for winter clothing reflected sophisticated understanding of insulation principles and heat management. They learned which materials worked best in direct contact with skin, which fabrics provided optimal insulation in middle layers, and which outer materials best protected against wind and moisture while allowing adequate ventilation to prevent overheating and subsequent cooling. Footwear presented particular challenges during winter months, as feet were especially vulnerable to frostbite and cold injury, while also being essential for mobility and daily survival tasks. Peasants developed various strategies for protecting their feet, including specialized winter footwear when materials were available, foot warming techniques, and methods for treating cold-related foot injuries when prevention was insufficient. Sleep strategies during the coldest nights required careful planning and execution to maximize rest while conserving body heat and maintaining safety. Peasants learned optimal sleeping positions that conserved heat, techniques for sharing body warmth effectively among family members, and methods for maintaining adequate warmth throughout the night without depleting their fuel supplies. The timing of sleep and wakefulness during winter months often differed significantly from summer patterns, as peasants adapted their schedules to take maximum advantage of available daylight while conserving energy during the longest and coldest periods of darkness. These modified sleep patterns help them align their activities with natural light cycles while ensuring adequate rest for the demanding physical tasks required for winter survival. Dream life and sleep quality during winter months were often affected by cold, hunger, and stress. But peasants understood the importance of adequate rest for maintaining their physical and mental capacity for survival tasks. They developed techniques for improving sleep quality under difficult conditions and for dealing with the sleep disruptions that commonly occurred during severe weather. Breathing techniques and respiratory health received special attention during winter months, when cold air could damage lungs and respiratory infections were common. Peasants learned to breathe through their noses when possible to warm and humidify cold air, to cover their faces during exposure to extremely cold conditions, and to recognize and treat respiratory problems that might develop during winter months. Voice and communication during winter months required adaptation to cold conditions that could affect speech and hearing. Cold air made speaking more difficult and tiring, while heavy clothing and shelter materials could muffle sounds and make communication more challenging. Peasants developed communication techniques adapted to winter conditions and learned to conserve their voices when necessary while maintaining essential family and community communication. Lighting during the long winter nights was provided primarily by firelight, though peasants sometimes had access to simple oil lamps or candles when materials were available. The management of lighting required balancing the need for visibility during essential tasks against the fuel consumption required to maintain artificial light sources. Most activities were planned to take advantage of natural daylight whenever possible, with evening activities limited to essential tasks that could be performed by firelight. Timekeeping during winter months relied primarily on natural indicators like the position of the sun, the length of shadows, and the behavior of domestic animals, as mechanical clocks were luxury items far beyond the reach of peasant families. Understanding the passage of time helped peasants plan their daily activities, coordinate community efforts, and maintain some sense of structure during the long, dark winter months. The celebration of time markers like religious holidays, seasonal festivals, and family anniversaries provided important psychological anchors that helped peasants maintain their sense of connection to larger cycles of time and meaning beyond the immediate struggle for survival. These celebrations, however modest, helped maintain community bonds and cultural continuity during the most challenging periods. Conflict resolution within families and communities became particularly important during winter months when close quarters, stress, and limited resources could lead to tensions that threatened group survival. Peasants developed various strategies for managing interpersonal conflicts, maintaining family harmony, and preserving community cooperation during periods when mutual support was essential for survival. Leadership and decision-making within peasant families and communities often evolved during winter months as different individuals demonstrated particular skills or knowledge that proved valuable for winter survival. The recognition and utilization of expertise, regardless of normal social hierarchies, helped communities make the most effective use of available human resources during crisis periods. Child care during winter months required specialized techniques and community support. to ensure the survival and healthy development of the most vulnerable community members. Children required additional warmth, nutrition, and protection while also needing age-appropriate activities and education that could continue during the limited indoor conditions of winter months. Elder care during winter months involved balancing respect for accumulated wisdom and experience with the practical challenges of caring for individuals whose physical capacity might be limited by age or illness. Communities developed various approaches to elder care that honored their contributions, while ensuring that limited resources were allocated effectively for community survival. Pregnancy and childbirth during winter months presented particular challenges that required community mobilization and specialized knowledge to ensure successful outcomes for both mothers and babies. The combination of limited nutrition, cold conditions, and reduced access to assistance made winter births particularly risky, requiring extensive preparation and community support. Gender roles and responsibilities often shifted during winter months, as the demands of survival required flexible approaches to task allocation and family organization. Both men and women might find themselves performing tasks normally associated with the other gender when survival needs adaptability and cooperation. Education and skill transmission continued during winter months through informal teaching, practical demonstration, and storytelling that preserved and passed on essential knowledge to younger generations. Winter months often provided the time needed for intensive instruction in skills that would be essential for future survival and community welfare. Cultural preservation and artistic expression continued even under the harsh conditions of winter survival, as communities recognized the importance of maintaining their cultural identity and creative traditions even during periods of extreme hardship. Music, storytelling, crafts, and other cultural activities provided psychological relief while preserving essential elements of community identity. Record keeping and information management, while usually informal and oral among peasant communities, became particularly important during winter months when tracking resource consumption. Planning future needs and coordinating community efforts required accurate information about supplies, capabilities, and needs. Innovation and problem solving during winter months often led to improvements in survival techniques and technologies that enhanced community capacity for dealing with future winter challenges. The pressure of survival conditions stimulated creativity and experimentation that sometimes produced lasting improvements in survival capabilities. Trade and exchange relationships with other communities sometimes continued during winter months through hardy individuals who could travel between settlements, providing opportunities to obtain essential supplies or trade surplus resources for needed materials. These winter trade relationships required careful planning and considerable risk, but could provide crucial resources for community survival. Communication with the outside world during winter months was often severely limited, isolating peasant communities and requiring them to rely entirely on their own resources and capabilities for extended periods. This isolation tested community resilience and self-sufficiency, while also strengthening internal bonds and cooperative relationships. The anticipation of spring and planning for recovery activities began during the depths of winter, as peasants understood that successful winter survival was only the first step in maintaining their long-term welfare. Planning for spring planting, assessing winter losses, and preparing for recovery activities helped maintain hope and purpose during the most difficult winter periods. The assessment of winter damage and planning for recovery began long before winter's end, as experienced peasants understood that the transition from survival mode to productive, Activity required careful preparation and realistic evaluation of their remaining resources and capabilities. Throughout the winter months, they mentally cataloged losses, noted damage to buildings and equipment, and began formulating strategies for restoring their productive capacity once warmer weather returned. The gradual lengthening of days after the winter solstice provided the first tangible evidence that the worst of winter was beginning to pass, though peasants knew from bitter experience that some of the coldest weather might still lie ahead. These longer days brought psychological relief and renewed hope while also signaling the beginning of preparations for the eventual transition back to agricultural activities and normal seasonal routines. Seed preservation and planning for spring planting occupied considerable thought during the late winter months, as peasants evaluated their remaining seed stocks and planned their planting strategies based on what they had learned during the current winter about their resource management and survival capabilities. The quality and quantity of seeds available for spring planting would largely determine their prospects for the coming growing season. The maintenance of agricultural tools and equipment during winter months involved both immediate repairs to damage caused by cold weather and long-term preparation for the intensive use these tools would receive once spring field work began. Peasants used winter months to sharpen, repair, and improve their tools while also crafting new implements needed for the coming growing season. Soil preparation planning began during winter months as peasants observed how winter conditions affected their fields and considered what improvements or modifications might be needed to optimize their agricultural productivity in the coming year. Understanding how frost, snow, and winter weather affected soil condition helped inform decisions about spring preparation activities. Livestock breeding and management decisions were often made during winter months as peasants evaluated their animals' condition and planned breeding programs that would optimize their livestock resources for the coming year. The successful survival of breeding animals through winter was crucial for maintaining and expanding livestock herds that provided essential resources for peasant families. The evaluation of survival strategies and techniques used during the current winter provided valuable information for improving future winter preparations and survival capabilities. Peasants carefully assessed what had worked well, what had failed, and what modifications might improve their effectiveness in dealing with future winter challenges. Community cooperation and mutual aid relationships were often strengthened or modified based on experiences during winter months, as communities learned which cooperative strategies had been most effective and which relationships had proven most valuable for mutual survival. These lessons informed future community organization and cooperation agreements. Resource allocation planning for the coming year began during winter months as peasants evaluated their current resource consumption patterns and planned modifications that might improve their efficiency and effectiveness in managing their limited resources. Understanding how they had used their resources during winter helped inform decisions about resource gathering and storage for future winters. Knowledge preservation and transmission activities often intensified during late winter months as communities recognized the importance of preserving lessons learned during the current winter and ensuring that valuable survival knowledge was passed on to younger generations who would need this information for their own future survival. The psychological preparation for the transition from survival mode to productive activity required mental adjustment as peasants began to shift their focus from immediate survival concerns to longer-term planning and preparation for resumed agricultural and economic activities. This mental transition was often as challenging as the physical aspects of recovery from winter hardship. Health recovery and rehabilitation planning began during winter months as peasants assessed the impact of winter conditions on their physical and mental health and planned activities that would help restore their capacity for the demanding work of the growing season. Proper nutrition, gradual increase in physical activity, and attention to health problems that might have developed during winter were essential for successful transition to spring activities. Social and cultural recovery activities were planned during winter months as communities anticipated the resumption of normal social activities, cultural celebrations, and community gatherings that had been suspended during the most challenging winter periods. These social activities were important for community morale and cultural continuity. Economic recovery planning involves assessing the economic impact of winter survival activities and planning strategies for rebuilding economic resources and productive capacity during the coming growing season. The costs of winter survival, in terms of resources consumed and economic opportunities forgone, had to be recovered through increased productivity and economic activity during warmer months. Infrastructure repair and improvement planning began during winter months as peasants assessed damage to their homes, storage facilities, and other infrastructure while planning repair and improvement activities that would enhance their capacity for future winter survival. These improvements often incorporated lessons learned during the current winter about the effectiveness of different construction techniques and materials. Environmental restoration and stewardship planning involved assessing the impact of winter survival activities on local environmental resources and planning activities that would help restore and maintain the environmental resources needed for long-term survival and sustainability. This long-term perspective was essential for maintaining the environmental foundation that supported peasant survival. The integration of winter survival experiences into long-term life planning helped peasants develop more effective strategies for managing the cyclical challenges of medieval agricultural life. Each winter provided lessons that could improve their overall life strategies and increase their prospects for long-term survival and modest prosperity. Innovation and technological development often emerged from winter survival experiences as peasants developed new techniques, tools, or approaches that proved more effective than traditional methods. These innovations were tested, refined, and shared within communities, contributing to the gradual improvement of survival technologies and techniques. Cultural evolution and adaptation occurred as communities incorporated successful survival strategies into their cultural traditions while abandoning practices that had proven ineffective or counterproductive. This cultural evolution helped communities become more effective at surviving winter challenges while maintaining essential elements of their cultural identity. The documentation of winter survival experiences through oral tradition, storytelling, and practical demonstration ensured that valuable knowledge was preserved and transmitted to future generations. This knowledge preservation was essential for maintaining community survival capabilities and preventing the loss of hard-won wisdom about effective winter survival techniques. The celebration of survival and community resilience at winter's end provided important opportunities for communities to acknowledge their achievements, honor those who had contributed to community survival, and strengthen social bonds that had been tested during the challenging winter months. These celebrations helped restore community morale and confidence while preparing for the challenges and opportunities of the coming growing season. The anticipation of renewal and new opportunities that spring would bring provided motivation and hope that sustained peasants through the final weeks of winter. This forward-looking optimism was essential for maintaining the mental and emotional energy needed to complete the transition from survival mode to productive activity. The preparation for resumed contact with the outside world involved planning for the renewal of trade relationships, communication with other communities, and participation in larger economic and social networks that had been suspended during winter isolation. These external relationships were important for economic opportunities and access to resources that could not be produced locally. The evaluation of winter survival costs and benefits provided important information for future planning as peasants assessed what they had sacrificed for winter survival and what they had gained in terms of experience, knowledge, and community solidarity. This evaluation helped inform decisions about resource allocation and survival strategy for future winters. The transition from winter survival to spring productivity required careful management to avoid exhausting recovery efforts or damaging long-term prospects through overly aggressive attempts to make up for winter losses. Successful recovery required patience, careful planning, and realistic assessment of capabilities and limitations. The integration of winter survival experiences into family and community identity helped strengthen social bonds and cultural resilience while providing foundation for improved survival capabilities in future winters. The shared experience of surviving winter challenges together created lasting bonds and mutual understanding that strengthened community cooperation and solidarity. The teaching and mentoring of younger community members in winter survival techniques ensured continuity of essential knowledge while providing opportunities for experienced individuals to share their wisdom and contribute to community welfare. This intergenerational knowledge transfer was essential for maintaining community survival capabilities over time. The development of specialized expertise in winter survival techniques created opportunities for individuals to contribute unique skills and knowledge to community welfare while potentially improving their social status and economic prospects. Recognition of expertise and skill encouraged continued learning and innovation in survival techniques. The adaptation of survival strategies to changing conditions and circumstances helped communities remain flexible and responsive to new challenges while maintaining their core survival capabilities. This adaptability was essential for dealing with unusual weather patterns, economic disruptions, or other challenges that might affect traditional survival strategies. The preservation of hope and optimism through the darkest and most challenging winter periods was perhaps the most important psychological survival skill that peasants developed. The ability to maintain faith in eventual improvement and to find meaning and purpose even during extreme hardship was essential for maintaining the motivation needed for continued survival efforts. The understanding that winter survival was not just about physical endurance, but also about maintaining human dignity, cultural identity, and community bonds helped peasants approach survival challenges with a broader perspective that sustained them through immediate hardships while preserving what made life worth living. The recognition that successful winter survival was an achievement worthy of pride and celebration helped communities maintain positive identity and collective self-esteem that supported continued resilience and determination in facing future challenges. This positive self-image was essential for maintaining community confidence and capability. The integration of spiritual and philosophical perspectives into winter survival strategies helped peasants find meaning and purpose in their struggles while maintaining connection to larger systems of belief and value that transcended immediate survival concerns. These broader perspectives provided psychological resources that sustained them through the most difficult periods. The development of wisdom and understanding through winter survival experiences contributed to personal growth and character development that enriched peasant lives beyond mere survival. The challenges of winter survival often revealed inner strengths and capabilities that individuals had not previously recognized, contributing to personal development and self-understanding. The legacy of winter survival knowledge and experience that peasants passed on to future generations represented their contribution to the long-term welfare and survival capacity of their communities. This legacy ensured that their struggles and achievements had lasting value that extended beyond their individual lives and immediate survival needs. Thus, through countless generations of peasants who faced the harsh realities of medieval winters with courage, ingenuity, and determination, a rich tradition of survival knowledge was developed and preserved. Their experiences teach us not only about the practical challenges of surviving in difficult conditions, but also about the resilience of human communities and the importance of cooperation, wisdom, and hope in overcoming seemingly impossible challenges. The story of how medieval peasants survived the coldest nights is ultimately a story about the triumph of human spirit and community solidarity over the harsh indifference of natural forces, demonstrating that even in the most difficult circumstances, people can find ways not just to survive, but to maintain their humanity and care for one another through the darkest times.